You ever wonder why you can't just build a factory right in the middle of a quiet residential neighborhood? Or, why your neighbor can't suddenly decide to turn their garage into a nightclub? Well, the answers lie in a powerful set of rules that shape our communities. And believe me, understanding them is absolutely crucial if you're in real estate.
So, let's jump right in. This is our explainer on land use planning and control. We're going to break down all the key terms and concepts that decide what gets built, where it gets built, and why. Honestly, think of this as your personal blueprint for acing this part of the real estate exam.
Here's a quick look at our game plan. We'll kick things off with the big picture, why these rules even exist. Then we'll get into the two main flavors, public controls from the government and private controls made by property owners. We'll wrap it all up with a look at the super important environmental regulations. Let's do this. All right, so let's start at square one. Before we dive into all the specifics, like zoning or HOAs, we've got to understand the why. What's the fundamental goal behind all of this planning in the first place? It really all boils down to creating communities that are stable, predictable, and safe for everyone. The whole idea is to protect your investment by keeping property values up, making sure land is used in the best way possible, and, this is the big one, keeping the public safe and healthy. It's all about smart growth that actually reflects what the people living there want.
So how does that vision become real? It gets put into a document called the Master Plan. And don't just think of this as some vague wish list. No, it's a detailed, long-term blueprint for how a community is going to grow. It lays out where the houses go, where the parks go, where the industrial areas go. And what's really important to remember is that this document is the foundation for all the specific rules we're about to cover. Now, the rules that bring that master plan to life, they come in two different flavors. And this is a super important distinction you'll need for your exam. You've got rules from the government, and then you have rules created by property owners themselves. Two totally different worlds. So on one side, you have public controls. These are the heavy hitters, right? They're enforced by the government, and they apply to everyone in a certain area. Zoning is the perfect example. Then, on the other side, you have private controls. These are much more local, created by developers or homeowners for a specific neighborhood. Think of your HOA rules. That's a private control.
Okay, let's dig into public controls first. This is basically the government's toolbox for making sure all the development that happens is orderly, safe, and lines up with that master plan we just talked about. And this isn't just a random process. It's actually pretty logical. Planners start by doing a ton of research on things like population growth and the economy. They take all that data and use it to build out the master plan. Then, from that plan, they create the specific rules and codes. And finally, they use those rules to either approve or deny new building projects. See? It's a clear path from research to reality.
Now, the number one tool in that government toolbox is zoning. You have got to know this term. It's how the government uses its police power, which is just its right to protect the public, to chop up the community into different zones, where each zone has its own rulebook for what you can build there.
And as you'd expect, this leads to the types of zones we all know. Residential for homes, commercial for stores, industrial for factories. You'll also see more complex ones like agricultural zones or even PUDs, planned unit developments, which are cool because they mix different uses together in one big plan. Okay, here's a classic scenario. What happens when the rules change? So imagine a little corner store that's been there for like 50 years. Then one day, the city rezones the whole area to be residential only. Does that store have to pack up and leave? The answer is no, and the reason is a little thing called non-conforming use. Basically, the store gets grandfathered in. Since it was a legal business before the zoning change happened, it's usually allowed to stay. Now, as a future agent, this is key. If your client buys a property with a non-conforming use, they might not be able to expand it or even rebuild it if there's a fire. So you have to know that. All right, let's clear up two terms that students mix up all the time: variance and special exception. A variance is permission to break a rule because you have some kind of unique hardship, like a bizarrely shaped lot that makes it impossible to follow the rules. A special exception, which is sometimes called a conditional use permit, is for something that's already allowed in that zone, but you just need special permission to do it. A daycare or a church in a residential neighborhood is a perfect example.
And one last thing on public controls, please don't mix up zoning with building codes. Zoning tells you what you can build, a house, a store. Building codes tell you how to build it safely. They're all about the standards for things like electrical wiring, plumbing, and making sure the building won't fall down. Both are public controls, but they do very different jobs.
Okay, let's switch gears. We're moving away from the government's toolbox and into the world of neighborly rules, also known as private controls. These aren't coming from City Hall. These are created by property owners for themselves.
The most basic type of private control is a deed restriction. It's exactly what it sounds like, a rule written right into the property's deed that puts a limit on how you can use it. And the crucial part is that it runs with the land, which means it sticks with the property forever and applies to every single owner who comes after.
So these private rules pop up in a few different ways. For a brand new subdivision, the developer will file a document called the CC&Rs. That stands for Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. These are basically the rule book that the Homeowners Association, or HOA, enforces. Now, a deed condition is way more serious. It's a rule so strict that if you break it, say you try to run a business from a home that's restricted to residential use, you could actually risk losing the property altogether.
All right, onto our final and really critical category, environmental controls. This is a whole other layer of rules, sometimes local, sometimes state, sometimes federal, and they're all about protecting our natural resources.
When we talk about real estate, these regulations are focused on stuff that can seriously impact a property's value, and more importantly, its safety. We're talking about things like contaminated soil or groundwater, hazards like lead-based paint or asbestos, and being aware of natural dangers like floodplains.
And I really need you to hear this. As a future agent, this is where the theory you learn for the exam slams into real-world legal liability. You have a massive professional and ethical duty to disclose any environmental hazards you know about to a potential buyer. If you don't, the consequences can be huge. This isn't just about passing a test. This is about protecting your clients and your entire career.
So, as we wrap this up, just remember, zoning, deed restrictions, environmental rules, these aren't just random terms you have to memorize for an exam. Out in the real world, these are your client's biggest protections and sometimes their biggest headaches. Knowing them inside and out is what makes you a great agent, not just a good one. So, the real question is, are you ready to be that expert guide for them?